לקחתם נסעתי לכם תורסיית הזו ויצחיים גילם ההליקים בבסם טעם מאושר דרכיהם דרכינו עם המסיבסה שלום השקבנו אדוני אליך ונשוב כדי שמנו כקדם
I just want to make sure people either upstairs or in the back are able to hear me clearly. Yeah? Okay. I want to start with just a couple of acknowledgments. First of all, Tamir Kaminsky and Howard Siegel in the office for all of the back work that they do to be able to make this possible. This year, we've actually expanded that with the Tisha B'Av camp that we are running this morning that allows for childcare and appropriate activities for young children to allow their parents, first of all, to be able to fast more easily and also to have the opportunity to join with us in our learning and our Kinos and working to try to make the day a very meaningful one. That certainly would not have happened without all the initiative that Miriam took to be able to make this a reality. So again, a very big acknowledgement to her. I want to also, as I always do, thank my wife Anna, that she has now for over 2 decades spent Tisha B'Av, and not just Tisha B'Av itself, but also the lead up to Tisha B'Av, really managing the home front out of the time. And I have very deep acknowledgement for everything that she does for our family. As Rabbi Akiva said, Shali v'shalachem shalachi, that whatever I'm able to achieve, whatever I'm able to share and give over to you, is in no small part due to her support, as well as her wisdom and insight, and successes she's had in moving me along for 20 years. What we're doing this morning would not have happened without the vision, the efforts of one man, Rav Yosef Dov Alevi Soloveitchik, Zechat Tzadik Kodesh Livracha, Rav Soloveitchik, besides all of the other gifts that he gave to the Jewish people, was the first to really pioneer this approach to Tisha B'Av. The idea that for us to be able to penetrate the often forbidding landscape of the world of the Kinos, to be able to have really a kiyum shebelev, to have an emotional engagement with Tisha B'Av, which again Soloveitchik emphasized on many occasions, that many mitzvos include both the action, right, what one needs to do to fulfill the mitzvah, but there's also the kiyum shebelev, there's the emotional fulfillment as well. And it's certainly for certain kinds of mitzvos, just going through the motions misses the point, right? And the idea, particularly on a day like Tisha B'Av, right, you could say all of the words in the Kinos book and not have any of them penetrate you. And the idea is that hopefully that this is a methodology which the Rav, again, for many years pioneered. It has been spread by his Talmidim and the Talmidim of his Talmidim, and that again, as kind of the spiritual grandchild of sorts, to have the schus to be able to perpetuate the Rav's legacy in this way is very, very meaningful. And I'll mention particularly, in certain ways I would call my Masorah in what we do, is to acknowledge the teaching of my teacher, Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, who again has been one of the premier proponents, advocates of this approach to Tisha B'Av. I listened for a few minutes this morning that he was live from Yerushalayim, and certainly the idea that he, as most Yuknel Shal Rabbi, as an image of how to do this in a way that I think is meaningful and touches the heart, is always, I think about him every year on Tisha B'Av as well. I want to start with the first kina, right? The first kina is the most ancient of the kinos that we say, is a kina that was written by Rebbe Elazar HaKalir. We'll talk a little bit more later this morning. One of the great poets of the Jewish people. He was not just a Tisha B'Av Jew. He had many uplifting piyutim that he wrote for many other occasions, but certainly that he is at the forefront of our Tisha B'Av as well. So just a brief word that you should have copies, those of you who are with us here in Shul, you should have copies of the Kinos schedule. Now, just a word, the Kinos are organized in all the Kinos collections generally by number. So this is Kina number 6. The number in the parentheses is the number of the Kina. The page number is based on the art scroll, with one caveat that's on the sheets as well, that the art scroll Kinos in different editions change the pagination, right? So you might have the wrong page on the sheet. Some it's 162, some it's 152. It's Kina number 6. This one's easy because it's the first of the Kinos to be able to be found in the collection. Shavas. So if we take a look, we're going to look at the second paragraph. Nafla udenu b'tzul d'chuya. Yerushalayim has fallen, right? It's like we're drowning. Right? That's the image that we begin this paragraph with. Eini chikso l'chazon ben berechia. And my eye is waiting, right, to see the visions of Ben Brechia. So who's Ben Brechia? Ben Brechia is the prophet Zechariah. So the prophet Zechariah is one of the last prophets of the Jewish people. He is a prophet during the time of the very, very beginning of the Second Temple, that he has very vivid visions, and he has visions of redemption. Right? And this is, again, some of you remember the famous story at the end of Makos, where Rabbi Akiva is able to wrest laughter from the jaws of defeat. Right, when all the other sages are crying over the site of the Temple Mount, he says, the prophecy of Zechariah is still going to be fulfilled. So we're waiting to see that prophecy. Ad Pil'ei Gilgal Chavuya. It's a little bit difficult to translate, as is often the case with the language of the Kalir. It's very poetic, it's very elusive. He says, until the wonders of Gilgal are hidden, right? And it seems to be, in other words, it's setting up we're waiting for the Nevuos of Zechariah to be fulfilled, right? We're still waiting that the wonders of Gilgal, right, are hidden, right? We're not with the wonders of Gilgal. The question is, what are the wonders of Gilgal? So the way that this is often interpreted, Gilgal, right, was the point of entry of the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, right? They crossed the Jordan River, right? They camp at a place called Gilgal, right? And again, and this is the theme we'll come back to, there's a certain inversion going on here, right? That we are stuck kind of at the nadir of Jewish history. On the one hand, we have Gilgal, we have Yoshua, we have Knisa La'aretz, we have entry into Eretz Yisrael, right? That is kind of one high point. We're envisioning the Nevuos of Zechariah in the future, and we're now stuck here, right? Certainly from the Kalir's perspective, we're at the bottom, right? We're at the absolute bottom, 0.0 of Jewish history. So the way a lot of people want to explain the Pil'ei Gilgal, what are the wonders of Gilgal, means all of the great miracles of Knisa La'aretz, right? Of coming in to Eretz Yisrael. Right? And again, whether those be the splitting of the Yarden, the miraculous fall of the walls of Jericho, whether that be the battle where time seems to stand still, that the sun itself is perceived as having stopped in its tracks. However you want to understand exactly what that is, those are the wonders of Gilgal. And the Gilgal is a shorthand. Right? It's a shorthand for that whole time of Yoshua of Knisa La'aretz. I was talking to a very dear friend and chavrus of mine, Rabbi Tzvi Engel, in Skokie, Illinois, who certainly deserves his own set of thanks, but for another time. So Rabbi Engel suggested a different approach, that it doesn't use Gilgal as a shorthand for the whole period of Yehoshua, but refers to something much more specific. So the Navi tells us, when the Jewish people come out of the Jordan River, as Yehoshua commanded them, they bring stones from the bottom of the river, right? And they come and they take the stones and they put them up, right, as a monument in Gilgal. Heikim Yoshua b'Gilgal. So Yoshua says to the Jewish people, he says, Asher yishalun b'neichem machares avosam lemor, ma havanim ha'eleh. He says the time is going to come that your children are going to ask you, what are these rocks all about? Right? What is this monument? So first of all, we see that the goal of the monument is permanent. Right? It's supposed to be there. It's literally set in stone. And Yoshua says, your children are going to ask you, what is this about? And that is your opportunity. And again, there certainly are tremendous echoes here to the whole saga of Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? And the focus that we have on transmitting that to children. The Jew of Salvation used to say that, and we'll come back to this, that just as there's a mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on Pesach, on Tisha B'Av there's a mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Yerushalayim. Right? This is the night that we have to, and the day that we have to convey to future generations, right, about the dark side of Jewish history, right, about things that happened that aren't so pretty. So here Yoshua says, your children are going to come and you're going to tell them that this is to remind us that B'Yabasha Var Yisrael Hayardain has that, right? The Jewish people crossed the Jordan River on dry land, right? And again, Yoshua says Hayardain has that, this Jordan River, right? This is in a pedagogical, a teaching moment, right? That's what we call it today. You're standing there with the kids, right? You're in Gilgal. The rocks are there in front of you, right? And that you're looking out, right, at the Jordan River is flowing. And the children are saying to you, Abba, Ima, what are these stones? They say, you look at that Jordan that you see flowing there today. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made nisim for us at that place. So perhaps these are the Pil'ei Gilgal, right? The wonders of Gilgal, right, are these monuments that literally stand there in Gilgal, right? And the idea that this is supposed to be part of the life of the Jewish people, of giving over the Masorah, You take your children, you take your grandchildren, your nephews, your nieces, whatever it is, you take them to Gilgal, right? And the wonders are still standing there, right? You can look at it and connect it to the past. Not only that it seems that this idea is not just about the future generations of Klal Yisrael, but they're also there, and I'm going to use the term, they're a tourist attraction for the rest of the world as well. So there's a whole debate. This is a sugya not for Tisha B'Av. How does one connect? There are various different ideas, both in Chumash, different Prakim Sefer Yoshua, about various monuments, stone monuments, that Yoshua was supposed to erect when they went into Eretz Yisrael. There's a lot of debate, right, of was there one set, two sets, were they moved? Not our topic for today. But the ones that we read about in Sefer Dvarim, right, where Moshe gives the mitzvah, you're supposed to come in and put up these monuments. So the pasuk tells us that you're supposed to write on whether it's exactly these or not is not important at the moment. They very well might be. You're supposed to write the words of the Torah, Be'er Heitev, right? Inscribe the Torah. And Be'er Heitev, Rashi says, you have to write in all the languages of the world, all 70 languages. Now, obviously, it's hard to understand what that means literally. Can you really have rocks that have the entire text of the Torah in 70 languages, right? The conceptual part of it is the idea that these monuments are supposed to convey a message not just for our children, but also for the rest of the world. That they're supposed to come, right? And that this is the tourist attraction, right? To bring them, to give a message. And the Ravanel is a beautiful idea. He says that it's the way of nations, right? When you make a victory, you put up a monument, right? That's how you celebrate. And he says that they write on them Osel Zikaron, right, as a sign, a memorial, B'shnas kach, v'yerach kach, k'mo shayu osem haromiyim, like the Romans used to do, right? You would put up a victorious triumph, right, that says we came on such a day in such a year, right? And the Rabbinel knew what he was speaking about. Right, because again, the Iberian Peninsula, right, the world of Spain and Portugal that he grew up in, right, was Roman territory 1,500 years beforehand. The monuments, I think, are still there to this day, right, that he saw these things. And at the end of his life, the Ravanel comes to Italy, right? He knew exactly what he was talking about. He says, so what does the Torah say? The Torah says our monuments are to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought us here. And this is the Torah, right, which is why we were here in the first place, right? That is what this is all about. And Rosh Hashanah Hirsch, as is his way, says the whole idea is to remind the Jewish people that their presence in Eretz Yisrael is about being a model and teachers to the entire world, right? That is our agenda. That's why we put up the Torah the day you cross over, right? That this is not a war of conquest for self-aggrandizement. This is about setting the stage for a country that is going to be the model of bringing the world back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the truth is, that idea, right, the idea that the existence of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, right, is supposed to be a model and supposed to be a draw, right, to teach and to inspire the entire world. It's something that we know explicitly when the Beis HaMikdash was dedicated. When Shlomo HaMelech dedicates the Beis HaMikdash, and he prays to God that this Beis HaMikdash is going to be a success. It should be a place that people will come, their prayers will be answered, they will connect. And again, I will add parenthetically that the tefillah of Shlomo, it's in the 8th chapter of Malachim, you can look it up after Tisha B'Av, right? That tefillah is anybody who thinks the Beis HaMikdash, right, was this primitive place, right, of basically butchering animals, and today we're much more sophisticated. You'll see Shlomo HaMelech says at the very outset that this is a base tefillah, right, that this is a house, a place of prayer. So Shlomo HaMelech says, "V'gamel hanoch yasher lo me'am Yisrael uva me'eretz rechokah l'man shemecha." Shlomo HaMelech says they're going to be strangers, right, Gentiles who come from a far-off country, right? They come to figure things out. They come to the Beis HaMikdash. They should come here. They should have an inspiring experience. They should be able to connect to God, right? And that's the nevuah that Yeshaya Navi says, Kivesi Beis Tefillah Yikari L'chol Ha'amim. At the point of the Beis HaMikdash is it should be a lodestone for all of the nations, right? Where the entire world comes and is inspired. Right, every Rosh Chodesh, every Shabbos, Kol Basar, all of humanity, right, will be able to come into access and have something meaningful, right? And again, there are many other examples of this idea. There's a beautiful Rashi, right? Rashi talks about, and the end of Sefer Dvarim, this vision, right, that the tribe of Zvulun, right, are supposed to be their mission in life, right, is they are going to be merchants, right? They're going to travel the high seas with their goods, right? So the pasuk tells us in the end of Moshe's bracha to Zvulun, right? Moshe's talking to the tribe of Zvulun and says, you're going to do great things, right? And you're going to be on, the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and you're going to be doing all this amazing thing. But what's the point? Amim har yikro, that the nations will be called to the mountain, Sham Yizbachu Zivchei Tzedek, and there they will offer sacrifices of righteousness. So says Rashi, Al Yidei Pragmatia Shel Zvulun, through the trade of Zvulun, Tigrei Umas Olam Ba'im Al Artzo, that merchants from all over the world, right, are going to come, right, for the high tech, right, for the product, right, to be able to come for conferences and to do business and to make connections. And what's going to happen? Hoil v'nitztarnu adkan nelech ad Yerushalayim. Right, we made all the trouble. We came all the way here to Eretz Yisrael. Let's see what there is to see. Right, what are the tourist attractions? So the tourist attractions are Yerushalayim, and they're going to come and they're going to be fascinated. What is this place all about? Right? He says that Himroim is Kol Yisrael Ovdim Leloah Echad. They're going to see the Jewish people serving one God. Ve'hein Omrim Ein Lacha Uma Kshera Kazu Umiskairin Sham. Right? He says they're going to see, right, that there's no nation like this nation. And they're going to say they're going to be inspired. They're going to come. Rashi says they're even going to convert. Right? So that's the vision. Right? You come on your tour to Eretz Yisrael, right? Coming from all over the world. And the truth is, again, in our generation, you start to see the fulfillment of this idea, right? Whether they come away transformed and inspired is a separate question, right? But the idea of people from all over the world are coming and are interested and want to see, right? The idea that, you go to the Kotel today, there are brochures in Chinese, right? For people who are coming from all over the world. One of those sites, right, are the Pilei Gilgal, the wonders of Gilgal. Right, that's the beginning of the story. Right, you imagine, Baruch Hashem, we have all of our brilliant tour guides in Israel. Right, you have that. They take you to Gilgal. They show you the beautiful stones. Then they bring you to the base. They take you through the story of Tanakh, and then finally you come to the Beis Hamikdash. Kivesi Beis Tefillah Yikari L'chol Ha'amim. That's the vision, but it's not the reality. And for a long time, it wasn't the reality. And the truth is that when we come to the world of Churban, of destruction, it's the absolute opposite. So Moshe Rabbeinu tells us the end of Sefer Dvarim. V'amar Ador ha'acharon, the last generation is going to say, your children who are going to rise after you, right? And the non-Jew who's going to come from a distant land, right? So again, it's what we said before. It's the children who are going to ask you about the stones, right? That's the vision of Yeshua. The Shlomo tells us about the Nachri Abba Me'eretz Rechoka. The Gentile is going to come from a far-off country. So Moshe says they're going to come, and they're not going to see the stones, they're not going to see a Beis HaMikdash, and they're not going to see a site of inspiration. What are they going to see? V'roes makos ha'aretz hahi. They're going to see all of the wounds of that land. Gofrus v'melach, sreifa kol artza, lo sizara, v'lo satzmiach, right? It's a scorched earth that they are going to discover that nothing grows there. V'amru kol hagoyim al me'asa Hashem kochel aretz hazos mecha ri'af hagadol hazeh, and they're going to stand there and they're going to say, right, what is this divine wrath that we're seeing? What is this all about? And what are we going to tell them? The answer is, Amru asher azvu es bris Hashem Elokei avosam asher karas imam. It's because they abandoned the covenant they made with God. Some of you might be familiar with a little book that Mark Twain wrote called The Innocents Abroad. It's an interesting book in general. He takes what was very much in mid-century in vogue for Americans, for Europeans, to go on the grand tour of the world, right, or sites in the ancient world. And Mark Twain comes to Eretz Yisrael, right? And those of you who have read Mark Twain in the past know that he was a acerbic, sharp writer. Palestine sits, he writes, in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that withered its field and fettered its energies. About the ford of the Jordan, where the hosts of Israel entered the promised land with songs of rejoicing, one finds only a squalid camp of the fantastic Bedouins of the desert. Jericho, the accursed, lies a moldering ruin today, even as Joshua's miracle left it more than 3,000 years ago. In the mid-19th century, Mark Twain is doing exactly what the Torah said would happen. He's standing in Gilgal. He's looking at the Yarden. Are there stones, right, with a grand vision there, right, to sit there, right, and take your breath away 3,000 years? These stones have shown a Jewish people that has a mission and that has a message. No, all there is desolation. It's all that's left. Renowned Jerusalem itself has lost all of its ancient grandeur and has become a pauper village. Palestine is desolate and unlovely. And why should it be otherwise? Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? So where are we holding in Tufshin Pei Gimel in 5783? As far as the Pilei Gilgal, the wonders of Gilgal, are concerned. So thank God we're not in the world of Mark Twain, right? The children are back, the grandchildren are back. The Nachrim Eretz Rechoka finds his way, her way, into Eretz Yisrael. And there is perhaps a shtickle artificiality about our Tisha. And again, that perhaps acknowledges the fact that we spent the last 3 weeks working us up to this place. We're going to sit and try to be miserable for a few hours. I quickly put this online. I was struck last night that getting ready for the Suda Mafsekes, it's been a few years since we really had a Suda Mafsekes. The last few years have mostly been Shabbos, but there is no Suda Mafsekes going to Tisha B'Av. So part of the minhagim of the Suda Mafsekes is ashes. You need ashes. You dip the bread in ashes, the eggs in ashes. I told one of the kids, like, you got to go make some ashes. And this is such a weird moment in human history, right? Because ashes, you never had to make ashes in the past, right? If you had a kitchen, you had ashes, right? That was the reality, right? Even after that, I remember, growing up, even as a small child, we had ashtrays in the house. Right? My father, fought, eventually gave up on smoking, but it was a long haul. Right? Ashes were something that's just like a reality of life. Right? The idea, right, that you would have to go, you might have thought there was a minute that, like, you should burn something specific for Tisha B'Av. Right? I don't know, you write a mullik on a paper. I don't know. There are no minhagim like that. Because it never occurred to anyone. Right? You went to where you cooked, you scooped up some ashes, right? And there you have ashes. So we have to manufacture the ashes to have a Tisha B'Av. And it's a little bit of a metaphor, I think, of part of like our Tisha B'Av is that we have like it's manufactured a little bit, right? But certainly not completely. Because the question is, are we successful at giving over message, mission, inspiration, whether to our children or to the whole world? Right? They look to the Jewish people, to Eretz Yisrael, to the state of Israel, right? In a world without a Beis HaMikdash, is what they're seeing inspiring them, right? Or are we depressed? Right? Are we sad? And the idea that we're not back at the Pilei Gilgal yet. We're not at a place, right, where we have wonders that we are able to successfully share with the world. Right? That's when we talk about Geula, when we talk about redemption. And that's really what we're talking about. Right? We're talking about the idea of a place where the Jewish people, where humanity is able to be able to meet their potential. Right? We're certainly not there yet. So the first Kina Shavas, again, Kina number 6, the first Kina in any of the collections. Shavas. Eini chiksal chazon ben brechio ad pilei gilgal chafuyo. Nam hila anivochi pal gesov zachara garu yesodeh pachat chet shilo takasedeh. I want to return to a story that we've treated in the past, a story of old Yerushalayim, but from a new perspective. Gemara in Yuma Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph says as follows: Ma'aseh b'shnei kohanim Shayu shneim shavin v'rotzin v'olin b'kedesh. So it's morning in the Beis Hamikdash. Kohanim Zrizim Haim. The Kohanim were known to have tremendous alacrity, right? The special mitzvos that were entrusted to them. There's no 9 o'clock minyan in the Beis Hamikdash. And before the sun rises, the Kohanim are there chomping at the bit for the privilege of being involved in the avodah. So the way they used to work, it was first come, first serve. And 2 Kohanim are running up the ramp that takes you to the Mizbeach. Kodem echad me'en l'toch arba amos shel chavera. Very interesting phrasing. One of them runs ahead and he goes into the 4 amos of his friend. Right now, 4 amos, that's the definition we use in halacha for shus hayachid, right? For the idea of a private domain, right? Somebody they're running, and it's interesting the way the Gemara puts it is Kohen number 1 is now in the personal space of the other person. And he's going to get there first. So he does what the other Kohen does what comes naturally. Natal sokin v'takalo beliva. So he takes out a knife, right? And he puts the knife, stabs it into the heart of the other Kohen. So this pandemonium, total pandemonium. I'm going to skip ahead for a moment. Ba'aviv shel tinok u'mitzo kishu mefarper. The father of the boy comes and sees that he's still alive. So imagine the scene. So first of all, the Gemara refers to, interestingly enough, as a tinok. Right? So tinok, today we think of tinok really as an infant. Right? And there's a reason for that. It's related etymologically for the word to nurse. Right? Yanika is nursing. This can't have been, certainly wasn't an infant. Tinok in Chazal often means a child. Right? And here he can't have been a child because children weren't involved with the avodah. You had to be already in your 20s, right, for this to be relevant. But it doesn't matter. Right? Lo aleinu, at the moment that the child, right, is in danger, it doesn't matter if the child is 2 or 22, right, or 82, right? He's still a teenager. So the father comes. He says, "Adayin b'ni mefarper v'lo nitma asakin." He says, we have hope right now because my child hasn't died yet, so the knife hasn't become tummy. Right? Again, if there's metal touching a corpse, right, in halacha that's called chalal cherev, that has the same halachic status as the body itself. So the father of the boy, it's his son's last minutes on the earth. And what is he thinking about? He's thinking about, I can save the knife from becoming tummy. Lamdacha shekosha aleim taras kelim yoser mishvichus dam. Right, which says this is representative of a generation, right, where murder is less significant, right, than a vessel becoming tummy. Right, it's a place where the religious values have turned upside down. Right, the idea that halacha has turned into like a bizarro funhouse mirror of itself. Right, that's the point. Right, the reason why we have an idea of tumas mace, right, of the impurity, right, of a corpse, right, is to teach us something fundamental about life. Right? There's the idea that so much of the Torah is about the value of life, right, and how can it be, right, that we have to push death, as it were, away from us, right? That's what it's supposed to be about. And instead, right here you have, right, Nebuch, the last minutes of the kid's life. And all the father can think about is the knife. And that is, again, when we talk about the criticism the Chazal give us about what was going on right, in the end of the Second Temple. Right? The idea of a lack of perspective, right? The idea that things turn into vehicles for hatred of other people, right? Of values being totally not lined up. And that, by the way, we're not going to get into it now, but the famous story of Kamsa Var Kamsa, right, of Rav Zachariah ben Avkulas, right, who says any move the rabbis could make to be able to protect, to salvage a very dangerous scene. We can't. What are people going to say if we say like this? They're going to say like that, right? And that's it, right? And the Gemara says it was his fault, right? And it was that distortion. Fine. The middle of the story is where I want to spend our time. Amad Rabbi Tzadok al Milo Sa'ula. So Rabbi Tzadok, one of the great sages of Yerushalayim, gets up and he stands on the stairs going up to the Heichal, right? Going up to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, right? It seems clear that he was a Kohen. And he says the following thing. He says, Achenu Beis Yisrael Shim'u. My brothers, the house of Israel, listen. Harehu Omer Kimatzei Chalal Ba'adama V'yatzus Keinecha V'shovtecha. The Torah says that when a person is, when a corpse, right, shows up somewhere on the road, in the field, nobody knows what happens. There's a mitzvah called Eglah Arufah, that the elders of the nearest city have to come. That's the whole thing. They have to measure. It has to literally be the nearest city. Have to come as a way of showing accountability for what just happened. He says, Anu al mila havi Eglah Arufah. Who has to bring the Eglah Arufah in this case? Al ha'ir o al ha'azaros. Whose responsibility is what we just witnessed? Is it the city or is it the azaros? Right? Is it the outdoor chambers of the Beis HaMikdash? Now, the Gemara, in a almost meta moment, right, asks later on, wait a second, right? There's a halacha that there's no din of Eglah Arufah in Yerushalayim, right? So what's he talking about? Also, Tosfos points out here, we all watched. We know who killed this guy, right? And could there be a less Eglah Arufah situation than that? If you ask questions like that, you're missing the point, right? You're literally missing the point. What's Rabbi Tzadok saying? Right? The Gemara says that the point of what he was doing is that he was trying kedei laharbos b'bchia, that he wants them to cry. Right? This is not a sheer klali in Eglah Arufah. Right? This is not the time to sit there and, I don't know, maybe it should be this. He was trying to make an emotional point, right? He was trying to move the people who were there, and interestingly enough, he was successful, right? Just everyone broke into tears when he said that. So what are tzaddik being? Who's accountable? The Azara or the ear? The chambers of the Beis HaMikdash or the city? The Azara is the domain of the Kohanim. In fact, part of the Azara was off limits to regular Jews. Right? If you were a Jew bringing a korban, you came in with your korban into the Azara. But bein ha'ulam l'mizbeach, right, the area between the building itself and the altar, only Kohanim are allowed to go there. And I would suggest the Azara in this context represents the Kohanim in their position of leadership. And Reb Tzadok, who again very clearly seems to be a Kohen himself, says that maybe this is a story about how the Kohanim have let down the people. That the Kohanim are supposed to be, and we talked about so much of Tisha B'Av, is about us falling short of the vision of what we can be. It's the Kohanim, Kisif Se Kohen Yishim Rudas, Tori Vakshumi Piu. The Rabbi Malachi says the Kohen is supposed to be this figure, right, that you're drawn to. A figure who inspires by their personal conduct, who teaches you right from wrong. And again, that is in the best case scenario, right? And again, the people who are, if you had the privilege in your life to encounter great Jews, right? Jews who are great teachers, right? The idea that they lift you up, they help you, they lift you up in the sense that they can elevate you above your own pettiness. But God forbid, right? The leaders can be the opposite as well. Right? And if this is the culture the Kohanim are fostering, right? Is this culture where, right, Gadol Tumas Kalim Mishvichas Domim, right, where the purity of vessels, right? And again, the language is it's so sharp, right? Taras Kalim, right? The purity of vessels, right? What's a vessel? A vessel is something utilitarian, right? It's something you use to be able to do something, right? But a vessel is not an end, right? A vessel is not a goal, right? But the Kohanim are stuck, right? They're stuck in this place, and it deteriorates so far down. You know, you think about Churban Shiloh, right? The destruction of Shiloh, right? Shiloh is the first shrine. The mission Zvachim says 369 years. Mishkan Shiloh stood. That's a really long time, right? You think back, right? Someone's better than math than me, right? So you think back from 2023, right? So what's 369 years before we are today? Anybody know? So we're already 1650, 1660, something like that, right? 1650, 1660, there's no United States. You know, we're going back a very long time. And how does Mishkan Shiloh collapse, right? So we're told, right, that the Kohanim, right, failed, right? That the Kohanim saw this as this was, right, that again, it came to a point where Eli Kohen Gadol doesn't recognize somebody davening, right? He's not able to see, right, the pain, Nabach, of this woman who wants to have children. He doesn't understand what's going, he can't connect, right? And it's in the next generation, it twists and corrupts, right? And again, different opinions among the Mefarshim how to understand this, right? But the idea that basically that his sons were using the Mishkan as a way of fulfilling their own desires, right? Trying to get as much meat as they can get their hands on, and being involved again, on the surface, involved in a sexual way, right? Taking advantage of the women who are coming to the Mishkan, right? Again, and Nebuch, the idea of leadership, right? That abuses its power, right? To be able to take advantage of the vulnerable, right? To engage in abusive kind of behavior, right? So it's been going on now for 3,000 years. So says Rabbi Tzadok, maybe the people to blame are the Kohanim. But also, maybe it's the ear. Maybe it's not fair to dump everything at the feet of the Kohanim. Then maybe perhaps it's about society as a whole. There's a great Talmud Chacham who lived in North Africa. He's actually a refugee from Spain after the great riots of 1391. So there's the Tashbitz. So the Tashbitz wrote voluminous tshuvos, and the Tashbitz seems to have had, from what I can tell, an unusual interest in history. So most of his tshuvos are halachic tshuvos, but he gets into a whole question. Someone writes him a question about the Kohanim Gedolim, the high priests of the Second Temple. Now, the high priests of the Second Temple have a very bad reputation. There's a lot of, and again, even someone, if you're a student of the Mishnayos and the Gemara, you'll have all these stories, right, about Kohanim Gedolim who are corrupt in various kinds of ways. And someone wants to say that part of the lower spiritual level of the second temple has to do with the Kohanim Gedolim. And that basically is he rises to their defense. And says the Tashbates, he says in general, he says, first of all, there are many great Kohanim Gedolim during the time of the Second Temple, and he lists, right? He's got all of Shas open in front of him, this story and that story. And he says, Av Osan Shizkir V'chal Mismanim B'Shvil HaMamon Tzadikim Gemur Mayu. Right? He says something, it's quite a claim. He says that even those who bought the high priesthood, right now, it sounds that during much of the time of the Second Temple, the Jews were dominated by foreign powers, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, right? There was one brief moment, right, the aftermath of Hanukkah, right, where there is a Jewish commonwealth, Jewish self-government again, which again collapses in civil war, right, which again, has terrifying reverberations this year. But usually, right, these various occupying powers, right, would sell the Kahuna Gedola. So he says, yeah, that's how it had to work. But these were good people, and he gives examples, right? Yeshua ben Gamla, right, someone who is said to have in Yivamas, they talk about him being maybe not such a good guy. He says, but the truth is, afilu ochi is karinu l'shevach. He says the truth is we have beautiful things that are said about him. He says, Zachar, the Gemara says, Zachar osa ish latovi Yeshua ben Gamla shoshel mali unishtak to term Yisrael. Right, that they credit him. You should remember him for good, that he set up a whole system of schooling. If not for him, it would have been forgotten for the Jewish people. Fine. That's his argument. You can take it, you can leave it. But here's what he says at the end. Imhayum mismanim mipnei hamamon v'sonin zesa. He says, look, and he's referencing Yeshua. He says, if at the end of the day you're going to tell me that the leaders of the Jewish people in the time of the Second Temple, the Kohanim Gedolim, you want to tell me that they were money hungry, or pointed for money, and that they were miserable, they hated each other. He says, Avon zeh, Avon kolel haya, l'chol Yisrael b'vayisheni. He says, wait a second. He says, that wasn't just the Kohanim Gedolim, that was everybody. Right? The society had deteriorated to a degree. Right, that was the tone, the tenor of the conversations. Right, you looked at people's social media feed. All you saw, right, was nastiness and pettiness and not seeing the other person and cutting them down. It was the whole society fell apart. Look, nobody's perfect. Right, it's not fair to demand that of the Kohanim Gedolim. Interesting perspective. And it's interesting, even when it comes to the question, when you go back to the very root of the kahuna, you go back to Aaron HaKohen. Right? And again, Aaron HaKohen, who incontrovertibly was a tzaddik. But at the same time, Aaron is involved with the Chet HaEgel. And the question is, where does that come from? Right? Where does that sin come from? And again, the idea, right? You have this confrontation, right, with Moshe and Aaron. After the Eglah Zavayon, Moshe says to Aaron, what did this nation do to you? That you made them sin so badly. And he says, Aaron says to them, you see, you know what these people are like. Now, on some level, and there's this question, Azaros ir Azaros. Is it the leadership? Is it the society? Right? It kind of turns on itself. Right? The idea that isn't that the point of the leader? Right? They're not supposed to be swayed by the society. Right? So you go around and around and around and around. Rabbi Tzadok stood that day and he said, whose fault is it? We need to sit here. We need to figure out what's wrong with us. Right? Why we came to these terrible moments. Now, up till now, we've been looking at the Gemara in Yuma. But there's a different version of the story. It's found in the Tosefta. The Tosefta in Yuma. It's almost the same. He says, Shim'uni Beis Yisrael Achenu, my brothers, house of Israel, listen to me. Let's go measure who should bring the Eglah Arufah. Al HaHeichal or Al HaAzaros. Whose fault is it? Is it the building of the Beis HaMikdash, or is it the courtyard to the Beis HaMikdash? Again, the paradigm that the Gemara in Yuma cited is it the city or is it the Azara? Now we're asking, is it the Azara or is it the Beis HaMikdash itself? Who's really at fault? So according to this version of the story, so Azara we know, right? Azara certainly could mean the Kohanim, right? Are the Kohanim really fundamentally at fault here? The Heichal is different, right? The Heichal is, as it were, the residence, Kivayachal of God. Right? And that's the heart of the Beis HaMikdash. Kohanim are not at home in the Heichal. Kohanim are invited guests, right? If they're there, b'shas avodasan, if they're there because they have a mitzvah, they have a service, then they go in the Heichal. The Heichal is not a place, right? That's the place where we think about as God's house. So I want to suggest two possibilities. So in the time of the first temple, Yirmiyahu Hanavi used to use the word Heichal Hashem, God's temple, as a diagnosis of what was wrong with the Jewish people. In other words, that the sin of the Jews of the first temple was an assumption that God is in their corner, right? We are the chosen people, right? And if you're chosen, you've got it made. Not only are you chosen, Yerushalayim is chosen, and the Beis HaMikdash is chosen. Zos menuchos yadei ad poei shev kivi siyah. Right? This is my resting place, the psalmist says, forever. This is where I will dwell because I desire it. So we hit the jackpot. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu lives in our Beis HaMikdash. So we don't have to worry, right? We got to get out of jail free card. Right? Is God going to pull down his own house, his own people? And in fact, some of this, you read Eglah, some of it is the shock that they weren't too big to fail. And there's the very reality, right? When you think you're too big to fail, right? And then it happens, right? I used to think about this. Think about America before 9/11. It wasn't conceivable. How could something like that happen? Or the truth is, right? Pearl Harbor is the same thing, right? Ocean over here, ocean over there. We don't have to worry about the troubles of the world, right? And that was part of the dynamics. The Jewish people was sure. So Yirmiyahu Hanavi tells the Jewish people, right? It's amazing nevuah. Right? God sends him to stand, right? To speak at the gates of the Beis HaMikdash, right? Bad place to give this speech. He says, don't trust in false things. saying, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Haim. He says, don't trust, right? You've built up this narrative in your heads, right? It's great. Temple of God, right? Every Dvar Torah, every bris, every bar mitzvah, every Sheva brachos, right? It's so amazing. We stand in the shadow of Heichal Hashem, of God's temple, right? We're impregnable, right? Nothing can ever happen to us. So one way of reading this, the Tzaddik is telling the Jewish people, is it the Azaros, is the Kohanim, is the leadership, and so forth? Or maybe it's about this attitude that we have, that the Heichal itself is the problem, right? The Heichal is the problem because we view it, right, not as a result of our actions, not as a gift for our action, not as an inspiration, right? But this is, right, Nichsei Tzon Barzel, this is our property. And he says that leads us to a situation, right, where we somehow talk ourselves out of the idea that people are killing themselves on the ramp to the Azara, and somehow it's not going to have any kind of consequences. But there's one last possibility. And that is a concept that we find in Brachos, Lamed Aleph and Beis, Lamed Beis and Aleph. It talks about how certain great leaders of the Jewish people were hitiach dvarim klape mala. Hard to translate. Challenged God. Said to God when certain things happened, right? They acted in defense of the Jewish people and said, and this really goes really, really deep into the world of how we understand free will and God's control and so forth. But says, look, aren't you, in the end of the day, you created us, right? Isn't some of this your fault? Don't you have some measure of accountability? Now, this is obviously theologically very dangerous territory. But I want to read what Rashi says here. Rashi says, Achshav yesh lanu pischon peh, shehu garam lanu shabara yetzer hara. That we have a little bit of an opening, we have a defense. God was the one who wired us as human beings. God was the one, he gave us the yetzer hara, right? He put us in compromising situations. And maybe it's not all our fault. Imri Devei Rabbi Moshe. You know what Moshe said to God to defend the Jewish people in their moment of the golden calf? He says, he told the story. What's the story? The story's like this. Mashal and Echad, a parable to a certain person, had a son, teenage son, washed him, anointed him, fed him, gave him what to drink, gave him a credit card, and sat him at the opening to a brothel, right? House of prostitution. You don't think you're setting him up there? So the Jewish people were in a bad place. They made a golden calf. You were the one who gave them all that money when they left Egypt. Right? You were the one who took me away from them. Maybe there's some kind of accountability. And that's a shtickle part of Tisha B'Av. You read it when we read Eglah last night. Some people read it again during the day. The notion of kind of this ricocheting back and forth between the question of accountability and the idea of like, God, I don't understand why you're doing this to us. It's enough already. But really, anything deserves this? And maybe, this just literally just as I was talking, can we ask, again, with great humility, does it feel in this at all like maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kavayachol, is like the father in the story? Right? Like your children are dying. Right? And yeah, so like we had accountability. You didn't want the knife to become tummy. Right? Is Reb Tzadok also being Metziach Dvarim Klapi Mala? Right? It's not just the accountability. There's a lot of accountability to go around. The ear, the azaros, the society, the leadership. But maybe a little bit God also. Gordon Gittin tells us that Rabbi Tzadok fasted for 40 years to try to stave off the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And this is a reference in a number of different places, Midrashim also. So I wonder if Rabbi Tzadok's campaign to God started that day that the Kohen was stabbed in the Beis HaMikdash. Right? The idea of being able to say, we have to do the hard work, we have to confront, we have to look, leadership has to look at itself, Kahanim have to look at themselves, society has to look at itself. And this again, for the Kohanim, it's been a struggle, back to Aaron HaKohen, how do you deal with that? But also we can turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, yes, are you applying the letter of the law to us? Right? You're throwing at the book, maybe. But mamish karachim av al banim, right? To have mercy like a father has mercy on his children. So written in the Kinos is a special kina about the fate of the Kohanim. The fate of the Kohanim. And the idea there's such an integral part of this Tisha B'Av. And again, that one of the things, again, you go back to Eglah, which is the mother of it all. Right? There's so many references in Eglah, right, to the tragedy and the failure of the leaders, right, of what happened. So when we sit here and we think about what happened to the Kohanim, the idea of asking ourselves that question that Rabbi Tzadok asked, Ha'iro, ha'azaros, ha'azaros, ha'heichal, to try to sort through a little bit in our head society's accountability, leaders' accountability, and what we can bring back to God also. Page 174, Kina number 10, Eicha Yashva Chavatzelas Hasharim. V'no Mishraisen Kehanim B'nei Aaron Kinim Sarabayis Musar Ve'mora B'chosiv Kemith. Namishasilo, Kohen Oisalo, you Oiven, Maliven, Lachame Lacha. Yeah. Nada damikino, Mishmeres Elkan. Harasi. Okay, can you hear clearly in the back? Yeah, okay. Okay. The last of the great kings of the time of the First Temple was a man named Yoshiyahu HaMelech. We always talk about Yoshiyahu HaMelech. So for many years, my perception of Yoshiyahu HaMelech, what I've taught over Tisha B'Av, is that Yoshiyahu was an incredible optimist. But really, in many ways, like Rabbi Akiva, someone who, where other people saw no hope, saw utter destruction, Yoshiyahu had said, we can fix this, right? Saw the potential. Right? Both of them are Bali Tshuva. Both of them were people who grew up, right? Found God, found Yiddishkeit on their own. And there's a certain sense, it's incredibly inspiring. It's the root of, we'll call it the messianic energy of Yiddishkeit. The idea that the promises that we're giving, that even on Tisha B'Av, right? Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av, that there's always hope, right? So it's one of those things, and we spoke about this at length last year, that it's a challenge, right? Because it's like a spice where you have to get the right proportion, right? Because again, there are very dangerous elements of this. There are self-destructive possibilities. There is the possibility for really